Welcome to Backstage with Geoffrey Morrissey. We are here at the Royale in Boston. I'm lucky enough to be joined by Bethany from Best Coast. Bethany, thanks so much for coming on today. And so what, in your opinion, would be like the biggest differences between the two coasts?
I feel, well, obviously the weather is a huge difference.
We're here in February, yeah.
So that's a huge, huge difference. But I think it's also just like, when the Best Coast, the name of the band really mostly applies to California. I'm just sort of, I'm born and raised in California, so I'm sort of like referencing mostly California. But, the West Coast and the East Coast are different in the sense that I think the attitude is extremely different. I think everyone on the East Coast is like a bit tougher than the West Coast people. We have our own toughness, but I've noticed that East Coasters are like really like, because it's hard on the East Coast. You gotta like schlep everywhere and like public transportation, and especially in LA we don't have that, so everybody's just like has this luxury of like getting into their car and then being trapped in traffic forever. But I think that here and bearing the cold, I think that makes people like a bit tougher.
Yeah, well, I hope it's one attribute at least. At least we get something out of this obscene weather.
Yeah.
But you were here on the East Coast for a little while when you went to college. I understand that you studied journalism a little bit.
Yeah, I was studying writing, so I was doing creative writing, nonfiction. I had an internship at the Fader magazine, and kind of was exploring the option of doing journalism. But I've been writing since I was a little kid, like short stories and poetry, and so when I was in college, it's funny because that's sort of when when California kind of became my muse, because that's when I started writing. Basically all of my essays and like all of my nonfiction pieces were just about California. I was like trying to be Joan Didion kind of in a way.
Yeah. Nice. And then so if you could interview one person, who do you think that would be? It's sort of like a writing type thing.
Oh man, that's a good question.
That was a transition. I'm sorry.
No. That's a good question. I don't even know. I mean, there's so many people that I would love to interview, but I feel like given the fact that she is and has always been my sort of biggest influence, it probably would be Stevie Nicks. I love Fleetwood Mac's my all-time favorite band, and she's somebody that I've always really looked up to, and I just feel like she has such an epic story and is just such a smart and spiritually like amazing woman that I just think she would be really interesting to talk to.
Mm-hmm. And I loved your cover of Rhiannon.
Thank you.
That sounded awesome.
Thank you.
Everyone hasn't checked that out, you should. So Best Coast sort of starts in 2009, which, so much has changed within the music industry since 2009. What has been like the biggest change that you've noticed?
I would say maybe, the fact that just like, when we started, it was still in the days where like you put your music on MySpace, and that was sort of like where I started. I just created a MySpace, I put the songs up, and the awareness kind of grew from that. And I feel like now the internet is just so much bigger that I think back then it seems like it was like I did this at the right time. Yeah. Because I feel like back then it was like there were a lot of bands, like a lot of emerging bands, a lot of bands that were putting stuff out there, but it felt like the pool was a bit smaller at the time. And I think now it's like there's so much content, there's so much stuff coming out, there's so many people creating like Bandcamps and SoundClouds, and I think that now it feels like it might be a bit more difficult to be a small emerging band and get discovered via the internet. But I also still think that the internet is like a huge tool for like aspiring bands and artists, because it is a very easy way to get your material out there. So just seeing that, and the way that that's really changed and evolved, I think is a pretty intense thing to look at and remember back to when I first started this. So.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And so when you guys first started, I mean, you have like 3 or 4 albums right now out, correct?
We have 3 full lengths and then 1 EP that we kind of called like a mini album because it was longer than most EPs are.
Yeah.
But I would consider it to be an EP. I don't consider it to be a full length.
Okay. And so out of those, 3 or even the EP, when was the last time you listened to one of your albums, and what was the thing that you sort of like jumped out at you when you listened to it again?
I mean, given that California Nights is the last record that we put out, and it's the most current record, I don't necessarily listen to my records. It's funny because I'll put my iPhone or my iPod on shuffle, and I have my own record on there because when it was first mastered, I put the sequencing on my on my phone, so that I could like go on hikes and listen to it and make sure that the sequencing was exactly the way that I wanted it. So sometimes it'll come up on shuffle and I'm like, oh, I don't need to hear this, and I'll like skip through it, But I feel like for me, when I do hear California Nights, songs off of California Nights, and even when we play them live, to me it just feels like a stronger version of myself and a stronger version of the band and a more mature and evolved kind of, spiritually evolved, and also just like, as far as like musicianship and like confidence and just being better at what we do, it's there. And I think it's very audible and very, it feels very like prevalent in the music. So, and I think if I listen back to a record like Crazy For You, which was the first record, I can listen to it and really hear the sort of like awkwardness and confusion of like, what am I doing, But I don't think that's there on this record at all.
I was going to say, if it's any solace, I cannot hear the awkwardness and confusion. I still that record, so you're
well, that record was kind of meant to be about being awkward and confused. All my records are kind of content-wise about that in a way, but audibly I'm glad that fans don't hear that, but I for sure hear it because I remember back to making that record and feeling that way.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And then so when you guys kind of recorded California Nights, I read that you said that you took some risks that you weren't sure how they were going to pay out. How did they sort of like pan out the risks that you took, and would you do it again when you're going in to make the 4th album?
I mean, I think that what we did was really just sort of say we are not going to put any limitations as far as our influences. I think in the beginning we were I think it was a bit of a self-imposed boundary, but I think we were really like saying, we were setting up these boundaries and saying we have to really only be influenced by 50s, 60s, 70s kind of like classic pop stuff and stuff that's very evocative of California. And then I think when we made California Nights, we just went into the studio thinking, let's be inspired by all of the stuff in the world that inspires us, that doesn't necessarily like, our fans wouldn't necessarily think like, oh, I didn't know that they were into that band, because I feel like the public sort of sees me and Bob and thinks that like all we listen to is like surf music or beachy sounding sunny pop music. Mm-hmm. So I think that was definitely a risk that we took, was just like, all right, you know what, let's get out of this box that we've sort of put ourselves in and just like reach to all these different influences. And I for sure intend to do that with whatever I create next with Best Coast. I feel like I'm at this point now where I'm realizing that we can continue to sort of have that upbeat kind of sound that people know us for, while still while also like going to sort of like these extremes of saying, oh well, this song's influenced by Danzig and this song's influenced by the Bangles and this one's influenced by Drake, and doing that and still kind of coming out with things that people hear and they think, oh, this is Best Coast, so definitely now just like doing whatever I want and not really like thinking too hard about it.
I love that. That's awesome. I mean, we have sort of an older audience, so they'll always be surprised. Like I interviewed Torres. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's great. And she said that one of the albums that she was always listening to was Kendrick Lamar's "I Like to Pimp a Butterfly."
Oh yeah.
She has like a really raw sort of like rock and sound, but I think people are don't really realize how much sort of music that you don't think would influence someone does. So
yeah, I mean, I have my musical taste is very like all over the board, and I don't believe in guilty pleasures. If I like something, I like it. And I'm not afraid to just say like, you know, I listen to Top 40 radio and I like the Justin Bieber record, and like, I don't care. If I like something and it's catchy, and that's, you know, I own it. And I think that, you know, again, a lot of people probably would not think like, oh, Bethany likes the Justin Bieber record, but I'm just here to let everyone know that I do like it.
I concur. It's a good one.
It is.
So you did a lot of your own sort of like work in terms of a record label early on, and I think people sort of have this idea that albums just pop onto shelves.
Yeah.
What is the most difficult part of getting a record to the shelves?
I mean, it's a complicated process. I mean, you have to write it, and then you have to go and you have to record it. You have to find a producer that wants to work with you, and a producer that you like get along with and that understands your vision. And then after you do that, then you go in, you make a record, which is an incredibly emotionally draining, and you know, and physically draining process, because you're in there just like giving it your all. You're creating art, so you want your like legacy to sort of like live in this art that you're creating. So you really have to like put a lot into it. Mm-hmm. And then you know, when it's done, you have to master it and then sequence it and figure out. Sequencing to me is always the most difficult. Mm-hmm. And especially with California Nights, I wanted the sequence to be like just right. I wanted for the record to start out and really flow nicely. And so I was super, 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 super OCD about it. Like, I listened to the sequence. Bob made a sequence, I made a sequence, our manager made a sequence, and I listened to all of them, and I listened to mine a million times, and then I wrote this, like, it was one of the longest emails I've ever written, sort of defending why I thought my sequence was the most important one, and not to, like, discredit the ones that the other guys came up with, but I won everybody over with my sequence and my explanation for it, you know. And then after that, you got to come up with artwork and all of that stuff, and it's a long, and you know, it's a long process that is very fulfilling, but it's also like a lot of work.
Yeah. Now, you do a ton of these interviews, which I appreciate as a journalist. What is the one thing that you don't get asked about, or what would you like to talk about more often in these? Because they can get monotonous.
I mean, I feel like you know, a lot of people, the number one question for me is, people always are just like, so you're from California, right? And, or, you know, they want to talk about like, you know, oh, so you like the Beach Boys, and I love the Beach Boys, and I am from California, and I love it, but I do feel like sometimes when I do interviews, it's like those are just two things that it's like, if you Google Best Coast, I feel like the Beach Boys in California are two of the things that pop up next to our name, like almost always. Yeah. So for me, it's like I'm always kind of, I get really excited when people ask me questions that either I have never been asked before, or something that's like pertains to what I do and pertains to music, but is sort of like a different kind of thing. Like, you asking me like, who would I want to interview, is a really cool question that I don't think I've ever been asked before. But I like to just sort of like talk about life. I like when people ask me like, what's your favorite like movie, or your favorite, kind of like answering those kind of questions, like almost like survey-esque questions, you know?
Well, then, boy, do I have a question for you. You're creating a supergroup, like a lineup.
Ooh, I like this.
Who are you going with? Singer, guitars, drums, however you want to...
All right. The singer of my supergroup, I would say, would be Roy Orbison. I would want Roy Orbison to play guitar and sing. Roy Orbison is one of my favorite artists of all time. Mm-hmm. I think it just was like, honestly, just such an incredible musician, and wrote some of the greatest songs ever, and worked with so many amazing people. And also just like the way that he plays guitar, or played guitar rather, rest in peace, was just so incredible. So him on guitar and vocal. drummer, let's see, drummers. My dad is a drummer, so I feel like I'm supposed to know a lot more about drummers. I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but the drummer of Warpaint.
Awesome, yeah.
I can't remember. Why can't I know her? And I'm so tired right now. I can't even remember one of my peers' names. But she is an insane drummer, and anytime I've seen Warpaint, they're so good. Mm-hmm. But just watching her drum, she's so technical, and she just kills it every time. So I would probably get her. I would remember her name first before I asked her to join the supergroup.
Always helpful.
Yeah, and then bass, I would say maybe. Again, I'm blanking on the name, but the woman that plays bass in the Talking Heads.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I had 3 hours of sleep, so right now my brain's only half functioning.
Don't worry.
But she was always one of my favorite bass players, and so I would probably get her on bass. And then got to throw Stevie Nicks in there at some point to do something. And then I would just want to have Drake in there for fun to spit some cool rhymes on top of it all. Yeah. So that would be my super group at the moment, I think.
Subject to change. And then, so who has your ear right now? What are you listening to?
Lately I've been listening to a lot of Depeche Mode. Violator is one of my favorite records, and I've been listening to a lot of that. Been listening to I love the last Lana Del Rey record, Honeymoon. She's one of my favorite current artists. I think she's super talented and just has a really amazing artistic vision. And then I'm on tour with Waves and Cherry Glazers, so I hear them every night, and I think that they both have really great songs. Basically at the end of the day, every Wave song is stuck in my head, which is a really good sign, because if you write songs that get stuck in people's head, that means you're doing a really good job. And then Cherry Glazer also has some really, really great songs, and they're just a really fun band to be on tour with. So yeah, those are kind of what is in my vibe right now.
Perfect. Well, the album is California Nights. If you've not heard it yet, do yourself a favor and check it out. Bethany, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you.